Hey everyone, it's Jason Lowe, and in this module, we're going to do an exercise on compensation plans. So in the last lecture, what we did is we talked about the building blocks of compensation plans. All that a compensation plan is, it's an umbrella of these things that we call plan components. And in order to build anything in the system, you really have to answer three questions: the what, the how, and the how much. What's the eligible event or activity that's going to trigger something to happen? How is the math calculated? And then how much or at what rate do you pay someone? So in this module, we're actually going to do a hands-on exercise of building a compensation plan from scratch. In order to build this, what we have is we've put together a hands-on class exercise. So part of the collateral that comes with this class should be a document as well as the labs, the step-by-step labs to build a number of the exercises we're going to go through. So this is an exercise on building out a compensation plan. And so from here, you can see that we're going to build under the scenario that we're working for a company called Acme International. And Acme International is a global manufacturer and distributor of high-performance servers. They're in the midst of launching their new green server product line. And it says that Acme North America is a wholly owned subsidiary of Acme International operating in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. They sell directly to customers as well as resell through partners. And the scenario for their U.S. salespeople is what we're documenting on this slide right now. So we can see that for their salespeople, for this scenario, we're going to make the assumption that the rep quotas are $3.5 million. And that the reps for this plan are paid on the sale of green servers. And then underneath that, we can see a rate table. We say between 0 and 250,000, it's paid out at a rate of 4%, 250 to 500,000, it's paid out at 5%, etc. One thing I will get asked when I teach this class up front is people will invariably ask, well, what if the sale is exactly $250,000? Will it go to the first tier or will it go to the second tier? And that's a really good question. And so how Oracle looks at rate tables from a tier dimension perspective, 0 to 250,000 and 250,000 above. How we look at this is the right column is so the 250,000 in the first tier, that's actually less than. And then on the second tier, in the left spot of the 250,000, that's actually greater than or equal to. So how the system looks at it is it's really 0 to $249,999, 0.99 to infinity, to as many decimal places as the Oracle database can calculate. And then as soon as it flips over to the 250,000, it would then go to the second tier. So on the right up here, it's less than. This 250,000 right here, this is less than. And then this one down here is greater than or equal to. It's just a question I get a lot, so I wanted to explain that real quick. Okay, so Acme North America, reps have a quota of $3.5 million paid on the sale of green servers, and we see a rate table underneath it. Underneath it, it also says 50% of the commission is paid upon order booking, and then the remaining 50% is paid upon customer payment. So that's just it. So 50% is paid based on booking, another 50% on payment. And then the last thing, it says that the commission is calculated by multiplying the rate earned, so that's the amount in the rate table, multiplied by the dollar amount of the sale. So whatever the transaction value is, we're taking that transaction value and then multiplying it by that rate payout. And that's how we're calculating the commissions. In a nutshell, I will tell you that this is probably the easiest plan that you'll ever see. So this is incredibly straightforward. It's being paid just on one product. There's a flat quota we're being measured against, and we're really just taking the transaction amount, running it through a rate table, and then spitting out whatever the result of that rate table is times that transaction amount. So this is a very straightforward compensation plan. Statistically, the plans that you work with your customers will be a lot more complicated, but it's a good way to walk through the building blocks to understand how to design and build compensation plans from within the Oracle application. So before we get started, I ask you to print up one of the labs that comes with this is called the Fusion Incentive Compensation Plan Creation Lab. And so this should be a .doc or a Word file that was provided as part of this class. And so you can print that up and follow along. And so how we're going to go through this lab is you're welcome to pause the recording now and to walk through the lab and complete it in its entirety, and I would say good for you. What the exercise here is I'm actually going to walk through the lab, and you can do it along with me or see how I do it, and then maybe pause it at the appropriate places to maybe I do a few steps, then you pause it and you do a few steps. I'll defer to you as to the best way that you want to go through the labs. But in order to do the lab, we're going to start off, and let me toggle over to the demo environment. So to start this exercise, go to the training environment that you've been given access to do the hands-on portion of the labs. More than likely, you're going to be brought to a landing page that looks something like this. I typically will click on the Global Apps Login link. When I click that link, I'm actually brought to a login page. So step number 1 of the lab that you're going to be doing says to log in as Ed Kelly and the password that's associated to this environment. So I'm going to type in Ed Kelly. I'm going to type in the password. I click sign in. I don't need to remember the password. And then when I come in, so this is the landing page of the application as logged in from the perspective of Ed Kelly. To give you a little bit of a background, Ed Kelly is one of our demo characters that is a compensation administrator. So he's a super user for the incentive compensation and the larger sales performance management suite. He is not someone that's assigned to compensation plans, but he's an admin that would be designing compensation plans. A little bit of navigation if you guys haven't been to these pages before. First thing I'm landed into is a portal that, based on who I am and my role within the organization, I can see a series of responsibilities that I have access to. I can see on the left-hand side in our GSE and in our demo environments, we've seeded some news information. We've embedded some analytics. We have the links to the Oracle social network where I can launch conversations with people. And then there's more information down here. And again, entirely configurable based on whatever the requirements are for your customers. Navigation-wise, if I click the navigator link, so again, based on who I am and my role within the organization, I can see a series of responsibilities that I have access for. Within the world of incentive compensation, I have the ability to create compensation plans, do credits and earnings. There's a lot of these things, and through the subsequent modules, we're going to go into each of these and talk about all the things that you can do throughout the incentive compensation user experience. So in addition to that, to the right of this is the favorites. And so when I click on favorites, if there's a page that I go to a lot, I can certainly add that to my favorites. What I can also do is similar to your browser history, this tracks where I've been. So if I accidentally close out a window and I want to go back to one of the recent items, I can simply go there as well. Additional things, I can set up watch lists. If I have alerts or workflows that have been routed to me, I'd be able to see them displayed up here. Looks like I don't have any new ones. Let's see if I have any up here. And so it looks like I had one dispute notification for me in April of 2015 for an incorrect territory assignment. I could then drill into that and take action on that if I haven't done that already. And then there's additional capabilities that are available as is standard with all of the Oracle Cloud applications. So in order to do this lab, if you take out the lab, so the step number 1 says to navigate to incentive compensation plans. So I can certainly go to the navigator, and then from the navigator under incentive compensation, I can select compensation plans. Or if you're doing this from one of our demo environments, we also have shortcuts up here. So I can click on the link of compensation plans right here, and it's going to bring me to the exact same work area. So the way that incentive compensation is architected, at least from the administrative perspective, is from the perspective of what we call work areas. We talked about that this is the compensation plans work area. This is for the people that are primarily designed or primarily chartered with designing compensation plans. So if we want to look at some of the other work areas, if I click the navigator under incentive compensation, we also have credits and earnings. So where compensation plans, these are the people that are the designers of the plans. What credits and earnings, this is the people, the more comp admins that are the day-to-day. So as transactions are coming in, as cancellations happen, as adjustments need to happen, that's the work area for those comp managers, which is credits and earnings. Participant assignments and participant snapshots, these are for people that are actually dealing with the people data. Payments is once we've gone through the calc processes, we pass it off to payments, etc. And we'll go through each of these work areas through subsequent sections. So getting better acquainted with the compensation plans work area, let me just give you a little bit of a tour. So the main section, what we're brought to, this is embedded analytics. So I can see the first thing is the plan trend analysis. So maybe over time, do I want to see if the number of plans have grown or shrunk over time? The second report over here is plan participation. So maybe it's by plan, the population that we're servicing. So this is for 2015. Let's change it to 2014 because I might have some better demo data there. And so I can see I had more people on the 2014 sales plan. I had a good portion population on the corporate performance bonus, et cetera, et cetera. So again, just embedded analytics, all real time and just standard with the application. Underneath this, I can see information. I can see the list of the compensation plans that I might have active in the time period. Again, this is for 2015, which is where this portal is looking at. I can look at unused plan components. So sometimes I'm going to build something. I'm going to build an expression. I'm going to build a rate table, some type of calculation, and then I might want the ability to go into the application later and maybe clean it up. And so I might want to say, well, what components have I built that I may have that may be orphans that I might be able to, if they're not associated to something else, I can certainly go in and just do a quick audit to see, do I have any components that I built out that I may not be leveraging yet. To the left, as we extend the navigator on the left-hand side, this is what we call the plan component library. So the nice thing about incentive compensation, it's one of those things that you can build elements once. You maintain them in a central place in the plan component library, but then you can leverage those components multiple times in multiple different capacities, depending on lots of different comp plans might leverage the same lookup tables, the same type of expression. So again, you build it once, you maintain it centrally, but then you're able to leverage it across multiple compensation plans. So to start off the lab, step number 2 of the lab says under compensation plan tasks, which is right here, let's click on the create compensation plan hyperlink. So when I click on this, ask me if I save changes, I'm going to say no. And so what we're brought into is a wizard. And it's a wizard that there's a train on the top, and it's going to ask us step by step to go through each of the pieces to build a compensation plan. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to name our compensation plan. And so the important thing to note, because the training environments are shared across multiple partners as we go through the training process, I don't want you stumbling over one another. So we're going to so the XX in each of the labs that you're looking at, that's the we're going to preface all the components that we build with your initials. So my name is Jason Lowe, so I'm going to put JL as the prefix to my thing, and I'm just call this the JL Green Server Sales Rep Plan. Now, what I can do is I can also add a description. Descriptions are particularly good for customers because once you build out the plan component library, you're going to have all these compensation plans and plan components. And then once you're using the product for multiple years, you're going to assemble quite a large library. And so for people to go through and navigate through the library quickly, it's often helpful just to have a description so that it's a more descriptive term so that I can find out what those things are in the future. It's an optional field, but it is something that's available to you. The next thing I'm going to do is let's set up the business unit. So one of the things about incentive compensation is that it is multi-org, supporting multiple business units. It's been multi-org since the very first release of the product. So that's a nice thing to have. The next thing that we're going to do is let's do just the required fields right now. Let's do dates. And something that's really, really important within incentive compensation are dates. Everything in the system, the compensation plans, the plan elements, the rate tables, the people, everything is date effective. So more times than not, when I'm doing a class with a number of attendees and we run into problems, oftentimes it becomes a date problem. So for this lab, let's use the calendar year of 2015. And let's say whenever it asks us for a start date, let's do January 1st of 2015. Whenever it asks us for an end date, let's make sure we do December 31st of 2015. So I will do January 1st, and then I will do December 31st of 2015, and those will be our start and end dates for the period. That all looks good. I could go in if I had information. You can always go back in later. If I had information for the description, I could add that here. If I had information for a target incentive, what target incentive means is, let's say, if you remember the prior module when we talked about compensation plans, we started that off by saying that we had a compensation plan that the person had a base salary of $150,000 and there was a variable for them of $100,000. So that is their target incentive of the variable component would be $100,000. So if we were building that plan, we would put $100,000 there. Again, this is an optional field. You're certainly welcome to use it if you need or if the customer's scenarios dictate, but it's not a required field. So we've put just the basic shell information here. We've put the name of the compensation plan. We've put the start date, the end date. We've selected the business unit. And I'm going to click next. And what I should tell you is that what you've done is you've just created the compensation plan. Because again, all that a compensation plan is, it's an umbrella of these things we call plan components. So we just created the umbrella called the JL Green Server Sales Rep Plan with the effective start and end dates, and we can then associate people to that. But again, all it is it's an umbrella, and it's an umbrella of these things we call plan components. So if I built out plan components already, I could certainly just click the green plus button and then just add those components that I'd already built. But because we're building this entirely from scratch, instead of clicking the green plus add row button, we're actually going to click this icon that says create. So I click on the create icon, and this now launches us into a sub wizard. So we were previously in a wizard. We're now going into a plan component wizard where it's walking us through the individual steps in order to build a plan component. So you'll notice here, the first thing is we're going to enter the primary details. Then it's the add the performance measure. That's the what. What's the eligible event or activity that's going to trigger something to happen? Then the how is the math calculated? That's going to be our formula. And then how much or at what rate are we going to pay someone? And that's going to be our rate tables. So to get this started, and I'm on, for those of you following on the lab, I am on step number 6. And so we're going to enter in the following information for our plan component. We're going to name it with our initials. So I am JL. And I'm going to call this the Green Server Sales Plan component. Again, descriptions are optional if I wanted to add a description. The next thing I'm going to ask is calculate incentive. Are we going to calculate this per event or per interval? If you remember, per event is ask a question, give you a piece of candy, ask a question, give you a piece of candy, where per interval is ask a question, let's put it on the side, ask a question, let's put it on the side, and only on the last day of the interval are we going to look at its contents. So in this example, we're paying per transaction, so let's do it per event. And then the incentive type, I can select, is it a bonus, is it a commission, is it standard? This is used primarily for reporting purposes. So this is really at your discretion what you want to put here. The customer calls this, in the scenario they gave us, a commission plan, so we're going to call it a commission. This is also a list of values, so if you wanted to add in spiffs or other type of components, you can easily do that in the setup and maintenance section, which we'll get to that later on in this course. So I'll say commission is fine. In addition to making this an incentive type of a commission, we can also see that it's inherited our start and end dates. So at the parent level, because it knows it was January 1st till December 31st of 2015, it inherited those. Now, this is a spiff that's only open for a smaller period of time. A lot of times our retail customers will do a component that is for dads and grads, or a Mother's Day promotion, or just over the holidays, and they'll have promotions, Labor Day, Arbor Day, etc. They'll have promotions just for like a 5 or 7 or 10 day period. But in this example, it sounds like this is a planned component that's going to be good for the whole year, so we can leave it for this planned component's effective dates are good for the entire year. If down the road we want to change it, we can simply go back into the planned component library and make any changes to the dates that we want to. The display name, so what the name of the system is, so this is the JL Green Server Sales Plan component. The display name is what are we going to present to the salespeople. We can inherit this. If we leave this blank, it's going to use the name by itself, but we might want to put in a vanity name just so we can have a separate name that might be shown in reports versus what we're calling it if we have a nomenclature as part of the comp department that we want to name things. I'm fine with leaving the display name as is, so I'm going to click Next. And then from next, what we're going to do is it now brings us along the train to the next step. And the next step is add the performance measure. So again, this is the what, right? What's that eligible event or activity that's going to trigger a compensation plan to happen? And so again, if something already existed, I could simply click the green Add Row button. But because we're creating everything from scratch, I'm going to click the Create icon. And what are we going to create? We're going to create a plan component that says whenever green servers are sold, whenever a green server is sold, that's going to trigger this plan component because, again, as part of Acme International and Acme North America, we're trying to incent people for the sale of our green servers. So when I click on when I clicked on the Create icon, you can see I'm brought into another sub wizard. And this wizard is going to walk me through the steps of creating a performance measure. It's going to ask me to enter the primary details, which I can do right now. So I'll say, let's call it the JL Green Server Revenue Measure. Again, I can use a description if I want to. I can ask for the performance period. So is this a period that is it a monthly period? Is it a weekly period? Is it a quarterly period? Is it an annual, a semi-annual? What's the performance interval for this measure? Let's just say it's monthly, which we also call period in the system. And then you'll see it's also affected, or it's also inherited the dates of the performance measure, or the performance measure have inherited the dates of the plan component and the comp plan that we set up earlier, so January and December. Again, I can change these if these are going to be fluctuating throughout the year. So it brought us here to the first tab, or the first stage of the train, which is the primary details. But then you'll notice as I go through the additional things, this is exactly what we covered in the compensation plan module earlier, that within a performance measure, it's defined by 4 things. It's the goal, the credit categories, the measure formula, and the scorecard. So we've entered the primary details. We've named all this stuff. This is step 8 on the lab, and we're going to move into step 9 by clicking the Next button. And when I click Next, this is where we can associate the goal. So one of the things that I know is that there was an annual goal of $3.5 million. This was in the slide as well as in the scenario that you have. So we're going to enter in $3.5 million. And what I could do is, this is an annual number. If the customer had said, you know what, this is an annual number that's broken into monthly increments, we could simply click the Distribute Evenly. Or if we want to leverage seasonality, we could appropriately maybe put a heavier weighting on our Q3 and Q4 and maybe less expectations in the beginning of the year. But again, this is where we store the goals. Something else I should note is that if you are using Fusion Quota Management, or if you're using an HR goal management solution and you're managing your goals or your quotas in a separate system, these can all be imported directly and per participant. So if each person has different goals and quotas, and we'll talk a little bit about that later when we get into the participant modules. But this is within the performance measure where we're setting up the goal. In this example, it's $3.5 million. I click the Next button. This is where we set up the credit category. Now again, credit category, this is the what. What's that eligible event or activity that's going to happen, that's going to trigger something? So in our example, it's, well, whenever something is sold from the that falls under the product family of green servers. When that happens, I'm going to want to trigger that. So if the product already exists, and in our demo environment it does, I can simply click the Add button. If it doesn't exist, I can create new products simply from the wizard by clicking on the Create icon here, or from the Plan Component Library on the left-hand side, I can go into credit categories and I can create and manage those separately as well. Everything we're going through, I should note, what we're doing right now is called the top-down plan creation wizard. What that means is that from the highest level of the comp plan, I want to launch a wizard and take us to be able to fully build out the tree that is fully encompassing of a compensation plan. Alternatively, if you're a power user, you might want to go in and build all your expressions at once and build all your rate tables at once and build all your measures, and then eventually just assemble them later. It's an option for you, and we'll have plenty of opportunities to do that in later exercises. But right now, we're just going and following the top-down wizard. I'm going to minimize it on the left here, and let's add the product of green servers. So I'm going to click on the Add button, and I can certainly search for everything and see everything that shows up, or I might just want to type in green to bring up just the product that is green servers. I'm going to say apply, and I'm done. And now green servers have been associated to this performance measure. Something else I can do is, there was a note, and we can do this after the fact, but since we're on this screen, we might as well do it here as well. There is the expectation as part of the compensation plan that said 50% of transactions are going to be paid on bookings, and the other 50% will be paid on payments. And so what I might want to do here is I might want to, under transaction factors, I can simply click the green button. And then within here, I can say when order is booked, I'm going to pay that at a rate of 50%. And then when payment is received, maybe I'll do the other 50%. And again, I could set that up later, but this is where we would set this up. You can do it from the wizard or after the fact. So I say this is good. So now I have a goal of $3.5 million, and I know that I'm taking in all transactions of from the product family called green servers. I click the next button, and this brings us to the measure formula, which if you're following in the lab, this is step number 13. And so in the measure formula, this is where I calculate. So now I know that I'm bringing in and I'm flagging all transactions that are green servers. But what do I want to do with those? Do I just want to count the number of transactions that I'm doing? Do I want to take the revenue amount? Do I want to do something with the quantity, maybe something with the gross margin? So just because I've said my focus is on green servers, I now need to say, well, what about green servers am I measuring for this compensation plan? And what we know is, we know that we're measuring it based on the revenue, because that was in our example. It's measured based on the total sales credit, or the dollars sold. So we're going to be building a measure formula that's just earmarking and looking just at the dollar amounts. So the first question is, when I'm on this measure formula, I can see it's inherited, again, the name of the performance measure as well as the effective dates. That's stuff that we entered in the primary details in the first stop of the train. Within the measure formula, it's asking us, how do we want to process transactions? Do we want to process them individually, or do we want to group them by interval? Based on the decisions we make here, it can have a lot of implications. If we want to do them one by one, or do we want to aggregate them? And oftentimes it's the scenario that dictates which one is the best. As each transaction comes in, we're running it through the rate table, so we can process it individually. And then for the expression, so I know that I am going to be measured based on the revenue of the green servers that are coming in. Underneath this, we have the expression name. When I click on this link, I can see a number of the expressions that have been built out in the past. So for this example, what we're going to be measuring them on is how much credit have they received. So we're going to select credit amount, and credit amount is going to be leveraging the credit of those green servers, and that's what we're going to be giving our people credit for. If I click the next button, this is where we can associate a scorecard. If there was a scorecard that was necessary at the performance measure level, I could easily create one here. But in this very simple example, it does not warrant one. So with that said, I can simply click Save and Close. And now that I've done that, I can see that the first step of the performance measure has been saved for our compensation plan, and I can see that I've now added the performance measure called the JL Green Server Revenue Measure. It's weighted 100% by default. Sometimes you might have situations where you might be measured on, say, 3 product families, and they might be 40% for one, 30% for the second, and then 30% for the third as an example. So you might want to associate different weights for your performance measures. But in this example, we're just being measured on green servers, so we'll leave it with the default at 100%. And so that's the what. And so if I click the next button, let's talk about the how. So this is the screen where we're going to define the incentive formula. So in the lab that you should have printed out, this is step number 18. And the first thing that we do is we determine the payout frequency. And we already said this was monthly, so we're going to leave it with a period equals month. We're going to say, now again, in the incentive formula, if you remember from the lecture, the last lecture that we did, the incentive formula, this is where we calculate what the earnings or the payout amount is going to be. So how are we going to ultimately do a calculation? So I can select an expression. If I click the expression name drop down, I can see a list of a number of the expressions that we've used in the past as part of our live demo environment. If I don't see it, I could simply click the search icon to search for it. But what I'm going to do here is let's click create new expression. And let's create a new expression. And this brings us to the expression builder. I can create or give a name to the expression I'm going to build. And we're going to call this the JL Green Server Sales Rep Payout. I could also add a description, again, for sanity's sake, for the planned component library. I might want to name things down the road if I'm actually doing this as part of an implementation. And then a little bit of navigation. So underneath here on the left-hand side that I'm highlighting right now, this is think of it as a scratch piece of paper. This is where you're going to write out all your calculations. You have some operators here of addition, subtraction, multiplication, parentheses, etc. And then to the right here, this attributes area, it's somewhat unassuming, but what this is actually a window into the database. Now, one of the nice things about incentive compensation is that there is a very flexible data model under the covers. Any field within incentive compensation can be used for calculation purposes. It's merely a fact of you, the partner, or the system integrator, or the person using the application. Within setup and maintenance, you just determine which of the fields in the database are going to be available for compensation purposes. So I might see on the transaction object itself, I might see certain information that's coming in here. I might see information from the participants. We also have things of functions, of advanced functions, and numeric functions, etc. And we'll go into those in detail in later modules. I can also daisy chain components. So maybe the output of one compensation plan or the output of one measure is going to feed the input of another measure. So I can simply select this, and I might want to take the intervals output or the input achieved for the period, etc. So again, there's a lot of flexibility here as to you can do some very, very sophisticated math. In the example we're doing here, it's not that sophisticated. And so what we're going to do is, so what's the payout based on for a salesperson that works for Acme International? What we said was we were going to take whatever comes out of that rate table and we're going to multiply that by how much the transaction was for. So in order to build that calculation, from my window into the database under the attributes, I'm going to select the rate table rate. So whatever the output of the rate table is, let's select that. And we'll say we'll take the rate table rate and multiply that. So I'm going to click the multiply button. And I'm going to multiply that under the credit. We're going to bring the credit amount. And so what I've done is I said, okay, let's take the rate table rate, which is whatever percentage, and multiply that by the credit amount. Now, if at some point I'm building a long expression and I make a mistake, I can simply highlight that and say, you know what, I didn't mean to put a multiplication sign there. I really wanted to put a division line. So I can click division and then add that and then delete the other component, which I don't need to do in this exercise, but that's just something that if you need to augment stuff, you're certainly welcome to do that down there. So I say this looks good. I know that my calculation of my earning payout is going to be rate table rate times credit amount. I say that's good. So let's click save and close. And I can now see that that's been seeded there because I built it from within the wizard. If at any point I want to see what the expression is, I can simply click on the expression details, and then it'll just show me that what I built was the rate table rate times the credit amount. So now that we've calculated the how is the commission going to be calculated, or how is the earning going to be calculated? Let's go to the how much. So how much, or at what rate are we going to be paying our people? So I'm going to click on the next button, and that brings us to the page for rate tables. So from here, again, I can, within the compensation plan component, I can go in and I can add a rate table. And so a couple options I have is if I've already built the rate table before, I could simply click the add button. Something else, actually, I haven't talked about this yet. There is this icon called Where Used. So anywhere within the application when you're designing compensation plans, if you want to make changes to an expression, or make changes to a rate table, or make changes to some other element, and you might want to know, well, if I change this expression in this one place, what are the implications? So there is this capability called Where Used, where I can highlight this and select any component in order to find out where that element is used. So what I want to do here is instead of adding a rate table that already exists, let's go in and create a new rate table. So I create a new rate table simply by clicking the create icon, and we're going to call this the put in my initials. So we're going to call this JL, and we're going to call this the green server payout rates. For those of you that are using the lab, this is step number 26. And then what we're going to decide here is, so the rate table in its totality. So let me actually navigate back over to the PowerPoint slide so we can talk about that for a second. Okay, so talking about the rate table, this in its entirety is the rate table. The 0 to 250,000, 250,000 to 500,000, 500,000 to a million and above, and the 4%, 5%, 5.5%, and 7%. This is the rate table. Then we'll get into dimensions in a couple minutes. So as the rate table, we have to look at it in its entirety. So the first question in the application, if I go back over, it's asking us what's the output of the rate table when we're creating the rate table itself, and we're going to say that the output is going to be a percentage, because it's going to be the percent amount that we were talking about a second ago. And then, so we've created the rate table called the green server payout rate. So let's create the dimensions. So the first thing I want to do, and I'm on step 27, I'm going to click on the create icon, and we're going to call this the JL green server payout tiers. And what are the payout tiers? Well, we know if I click on the green plus button, we know that 0 to 250,000 was one of them. We know that 250,000 to 500,000 was another. We knew 500,000 to 1 million. And we knew 1 million and above. So let's do 1 million. And let's do above, let's just do a bunch of 9s, which just means and bigger than that. So I say, let's click Save and Close. And you've built a rate table. And the way you know is if we click on the Edit Rates button right here on the top right, I can now set up my rates. So between 0 and 250,000, we had a rate of 4%. And this is where the percentages, you'll note, this is the rate table when we said the rate table was a percent. This is the 4%. This is the 5%. We'll say the third tier is 5.5. And we'll say 7%. And that's our rate table. Now, something that's not in the lab, but let me just show you how multidimensional rate tables work. So we created something called the JL Green Servers. And let's say that we wanted to have a different payout for our North American division versus our European division, etc. So I could create something. You don't need to do this. This is just me showing you something. I could click the Create button, and then within the Create, I could do JL. I'll call this Regions. And instead of an amount, and the 0 to 250 to 250,000 to 500,000, those are classified as amounts. Percents would be like 0 to 25%, 25 to 50%. In the last lecture, we talked about expressions. This is maybe 0 to 25% of someone's salary and 25 to 50% of someone's salary, or percentage of their quota, where everyone has a different quota or salary number. You don't want to hard code those and actually want to put math into each of the tiers. But we also talked about the alphanumeric, or the string. And so let's say, for example, we wanted to do North America. So when sales happen in North America versus when sales happen in Europe versus, say, Asia Pacific, as an example. So I could click Save and Close. And then what I could do is I click Edit Rates. And then now I see North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific here, and the revenues along the top. I personally like revenues on the left-hand side and maybe geographies along the top. So I will switch the X and Y axis real quick. I can update the display. And so now maybe between 0 and 250,000 in North America, it's paid out at a rate of 4%. But maybe in Europe, it's paid out at a rate of 5%, and in Asia Pacific, maybe it's 6.7%. As an example. And then I can start adding multiple dimensions, as many as I see fit. Just an example, that's not part of our class here. So let me, because it's not part of it, or not part of the exercise we're doing here, I'm simply going to delete the regions. Yes, I want to delete it. I click Save. And let me edit the rates one more time. And now it's back just to the 4%, 5%, 5.5, and 7. I was just doing that for illustrative purposes to show you that that's how you do the multidimensional rate tables. So the rate table itself looks good. I'm going to click Save and Close. And I'm going to click Save and Close again. And this is step number 32 in the lab. And now you can see that in the rate table part of the train, I can see that the rate table, the JL Green Servers payout rates, has now been added. The one thing that it's asking me for, if I look down below, it's saying that I need to put in an input expression. And so here's the deal with that. It's that, so you've set up and said 0 to 250,000, 250 to 500,000, et cetera, is going to yield rates of 4, 5, 5.5, or 7% respectively. But the system needs to know what field in the database are you passing in to be evaluated, the 0 to 250, 250 to 500. And so that's what it's asking us here. So at this dimension of the green server payout tiers, we have to say, take this field or take these elements, because we could be passing over revenue, we could be passing over quantity or margin or gross profit or number of units sold or what have you, whatever you wanted it to be. So I'm going to go in and I could, again, if the expression already existed, I could simply select it, but just for as part of the exercise, let's go in and let's create a new expression. So this is step 33. We're going to create a new expression. And this brings us back to the expression builder that we used a couple minutes ago. We're going to call this the JL Green Server Attainment. And then a minute ago, when we created the expressions, we went under the attributes to the window into the database. And I showed this a little bit earlier, is if we want to take the output of something. So we know we have a performance measure that's measuring our attainment of green servers. So let's bring the output of that performance measure and bring that in and feed that to the rate table. So of the measure results, I created the measure that started with JL. So I'm going to click Search. And it finds right here the JL Green Server Revenue Measure. And under this measure, we have a series of attributes that we can select. We can do the output achieved, we can do the input achieved, etc. I'm simply going to select the output. So let's just take the total output of this measure and let's bring that over. So I simply highlight output and then I click Add to Expression. And when I click Add to Expression, it says whatever the sum is of our performance measure for green servers, let's just take that output and we're going to feed that to the rate table. So I say Save and Close. And it's there. And so the next thing I can do is I can click the Next button. And then this is all fine. All the payment information, I'm going to leverage it by default. We'll go into details later what payment through third party means. I'm just going to accept all of this. And I click Next. And I can now review my compensation plan. I can say that all that a compensation plan is. It's an umbrella of these things we call plan components. I built this plan component, and it has the performance measure set up for it, which is the green server revenue measure. It has the how, which is how is the math calculated for the commission payout, which is just the rate table times the credit amount. And then it has the rates that we set up. And the rates, this is for the rate table. If I wanted to preview the rates, I could simply just click edit rates. And I could see all these numbers of the 4%, 5%, etc. all here. I'll click save and close. And this looks all good to me, so I'm going to click save and close. And when I click save and close, I can see that the valid for calculation green checkbox is now there. And I can see that my compensation plan, which is called the JL Green Server Sales Rep Plan, now has a valid for calculation compensation plan component underneath it with the appropriate effective start and end dates. I say this all looks well and good, so I click save and close. And that's it. And now, just to confirm it's there, if I type JL right here, I can see, lo and behold, here is the compensation plan I created, and the entire thing is valid. I can see that I'm logged in as Ed Kelly, so Ed made the changes. I can see the last update date. And if I drill into it, all that a compensation plan is, it's an umbrella of these things that we call plan components. And in order to build and design any plan component, you really just have to answer 3 questions: the what, the how, and the how much. What's the eligible event or activity? For us, it's selling green servers. How is the math calculated? We're taking the rate table rate and multiplying it by the revenue that's sold. And then the how much, or at what rate, that's the 0 to 250,000, 250,000 to 500,000. Since I'm on this screen, this actually concludes this lab, but a couple other things very quickly just from a navigation standpoint. One of the things we talked about when we logged in as Ed Kelly is this concept called social. And so within social, when we were on that portal, one of the nice things about incentive compensation is that the many of the incentive compensation objects are registered social objects. So let's say, for example, I'm in the process of designing a compensation plan, and I might want to click on the social icon, which says that this compensation plan, because it's new, we just created it, is not shared on the Oracle Social Network. So let me click share. And I can now see it's created a record for this compensation plan. I can see when it was set up. I could add posts to it. If I wanted to take documents and associate documents to the plan design process, I could certainly update those here. If I wanted to add participants, I might want to go in and manage and say, in addition to Ed Kelly, who I'm logged in as, maybe Amy Fang, my colleague, needs to be part of this as well. So I could simply add her to this, and then we could then have a conversation. So anyway, so social is an element that is directly part of incentive compensation. As I'm building out, again, part of the plan component library, you build it once, you maintain it centrally, and then you can leverage it in other places. I can click duplicate, so I can duplicate this or any part of the compensation plan, each of the expressions or the rate tables. I could duplicate it and maybe make a change to it. So maybe I want to run a model and make some changes for maybe the next fiscal year planning. I might want to do stuff like that. I could also export this. So maybe you're designing all your plans in a test environment, and I want to export it and move it to production. Again, that's all done from within the UI. There's a lot of flexibility within the application. This looks good to me. What I'm also going to say is I'm just going to say this is approved, and we'll get to that because I'm going to use that later. So approval status is just an attribute for us to manage, has it been approved or not approved. I say save and close, and that's it. We've built a compensation plan. So if I go back to the PowerPoint, so let's talk a little bit about what we built. So the hands-on exercise was, we are Acme International, and as part of the North American division, we were wanting to put together a compensation plan just for those of our salespeople that are paid on green servers. We wanted to give them a quota of $3.5 million. We said that the payout structure was as follows, that between 0 and 250,000, they're paid out at 4% and on through each of the tiers. We said that 50% of the commission is paid on bookings and the other 50% is done on payment. And we also said that we're calculating the commission by multiplying the rate earned, which was that rate table result. We're multiplying that by the credit amount, or the dollar amount of the sale. And so you can see, hopefully, and this is obviously your first time going through this, and the more times you do it, the better and more comfortable you be with it. But you've built your first compensation plan. So congratulations. And with that, that concludes this module on the hands-on exercise of building a compensation plan.